Hi, my name is Amy. I'm the owner of Silverwork Studios in Sausalito, California. We're a create your own jewelry studio, and we've helped thousands of beginners create their very first custom jewelry piece. We teach basic soldering and metalworking, and we've decided to take some of our favorite projects and put them online so everybody can learn how to do it. Today, we're going to make this thick, oops, dropped it, this thick hammered band piece. And it's really fun because you get to hammer and you get a lot of your aggression out. We have a list of the materials that you will need in the description. And so let's get started. So we're going to pull our hair up and let's get ready to rumble.
Here's the tools we'll be using in our project today. We've got a link to all of these in the description below.
Okay, so we're going to take our thick triple band. I love this band. I get it from Rio. We're going to use our handy dandy ring sizer. I have a link to this. I found it on Amazon. I have a link to this in below. It imagines that you're going to use a saw to cut your piece. So we actually mark it with a Sharpie at where the theoretical saw blade would go. We don't saw things here at the studio because we're too lazy and the saw blades break all the time. So we use clippers. Sometimes we use bolt cutters depending on how thick the band is. So you might have to use all your strength there. Be sure that there's nobody standing nearby as it might pop off. But here is our piece of triple band. It's a little sharp. So we are going to go to the Dremel and Dremel the edges. If you don't have a Dremel, you can use a hand file. But basically what we're trying to do is make sure that it's nice and flat across the top and that it's not too sharp. Where it gets trimmed, you'll see there's a little bit of an edge there. So I'm just sanding it down with a little bit of sandpaper. A Dremel is basically just a piece of spinning sandpaper in this case. And I'm just trying to get those edges nice and soft so that they're not too sharp. And then because we're going to connect them together. So we actually also need them to be straight. Next, we're going to take our band over to our mini anvil and we're going to tape it down so that we can hammer it. I like to use a ball peen hammer. I use painter's tape. And I'm just taping it in place so that it's nice and steady. And then I am just going to pound, 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 and then I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. Now I'm just going to flip it over and hammer the unhammered side, again, using the end of my ball peen. Okay, now it's nice and hammered. Look at how beautiful that looks. I'm also going to check the size. Something that happens when you hammer it is the silver stretches out a little bit. And so this will actually end up being a little bit longer than where we were originally making it to. We were making it to an 8. You can see it stretched a little bit all the way to a 9. So what we're going to do is we are going to mark it again. This time I am going to use my bolt cutters. This silver has gotten what's called work hardened, so it means it's even harder to cut. And so I'm trimming it off here. I'm going to trim it one more time, and we'll just keep measuring it and trimming it until we're sure that it's the right size. And we'll use our handy dandy little ring sizer to make sure that it's an 8. And where I trimmed it, it's going to be sharp again. And so I'm going to need to, I'm using my bolt cutters here to make it as straight as I can before I take it back over to the Dremel, which I'll have to do that to make it nice and soft again. One thing we do here at the studio is we keep all of our little silver bits and we use them to make little charms that we can put onto rings and other things. We have another project where we will show you how to do that. We use our ring bender. This is our ring bender to actually shape these rings into a circle. I also have a link to this product in the bottom of our video here. This is really important to have if you have a big, thick piece of metal like this. If you don't have a big, thick piece of metal, you can size it just using a ring mandrel and a hammer, a leather or a plastic hammer, because you don't want to mar your silver. But when you're doing a big thick piece like this, it can be really tough to kind of get those edges together. And so we use this ring bender. Our goal here is to really get those two pieces to touch. So I also like to use my plastic covered pliers there. See how I was able to bend it so that that's completely touching. Now we are ready to solder. Keep in mind the edges of the metal have to be connected. They have to be touching each other in order to solder it together and make it connect. So here I am. I'm going to put a little bit of flux on there. And now I'm taking my pieces of solder. We use pre-cut solder. I'm using extra easy in this case. We are only doing one solder point. So I'm just going to use extra easy, which has the lowest melting point of all of our solder choices. This can be a little tricky of a process, getting these tiny little bits of solder actually right on top of that break. It takes a little precision and patience. You'll see there the little squares are on there. And now I'm starting to heat up the piece. We like to start pretty far away from your piece that you're soldering. You'll see those solder chips, they're jumping around. That's because what's happening is the flux that you put on there, it bubbles up and once it bubbles and then you'll see it get foamy, now your solder chips are stuck in place and you can get a lot closer. We like to get to the edge of the blue flame. You'll start to see greens coming out of your flames. And you'll see those solder chips, they were squares. Now they're becoming circles, and then they are going to liquefy. I'm using my solder pick here to move them around to actually stretch them across that break in the metal. And there we go. So that was round one. We're cooling it. We put it in the water. It cools immediately, and we can touch it. And now I'm just looking at it to see, and I've missed a little bit on the top there. You'll see that there's a little bit more to do. You'll see that the silver has changed colors. It's a 0.925 sterling silver, so the balance of it is copper. And that copper has come to the surface and oxidized. So we throw it in the pickle, and now once it's pickled, the metal cleans up. And now we are going to do one more solder event, and we are going to try to close up that little gap that's at the top of this band. This thick band can be a challenge, not only from the standpoint of getting the edges to where they're touching and connecting and getting the filing right, but also getting it to solder all the way across. Okay, it's time to add another little chip right on that little gap that we're trying to fill. So I fluxed it, and now I'm putting another solder chip on there and getting ready to light it up. So you'll see I'm starting again from a distance, getting it to heat up. You see it get foamy, the flux gets foamy, and then we come in, that little piece of solder is turning into a ball, and now we're just waiting for it to melt, and then it actually is attaching to my solder pick right there, so I'm trying to get it back on. When you get better at soldering, you want to keep your solder pick in your dominant hand and your flame in your non-dominant hand, because your solder pick is really your finger in the fire, and you want to be able to manipulate what you're working on with your solder pick. So I've got that little piece of solder. It's giving me trouble right there. It went around the back of the piece. There it is. It's back on front now. And I'm just continuing to heat it up. It's a little ball right now, and then it's going to flatten and it's going to become liquidy. And then that's when we can spread it, and it will actually it completely closes that gap on the piece of metal. So you can see it getting soft there. And the silver again is changing color because again, it's sterling silver, which is 0.925 silver. So the balance of it is copper. That copper is oxidizing. We put it back into the water. It cools immediately. And we're going to take a quick look and make sure that it is all the way across. It is. It's a little rough on the top. So we're going to grind that down with our Dremel again. But first, we're going to hammer it into a nice circle and make sure that it's the right size before we go to our next step. And look at how great it looks. I love these hammered bands. All right, she's nice and round. So we're just going to look at that area that we need to sand down. Going to get back on the Dremel.
We're just going to sand the top of that so that it's nice and flat before we put it back into the pickle, and then we will polish. We use a tumbler to polish. It just uses soap and water and stainless steel filings. We find it works really, really well, so we polish it just for a couple minutes and it comes out so beautiful and shiny. And now we're ready to just make sure that it's this right size. Make sure that it's nice and finished. Maybe another tap, tap, just to make sure that it's nice and round. And we have a beautiful piece. There she is. Thank you for hanging with me and learning how to make a thick silver hammered band. Please subscribe and we'll do more projects together. See you soon.